Approximately 80% of individuals in Canada have at least one sibling, according to Statistics Canada. I myself grew up in a household with two little sisters, therefore making me the oldest. As many of you with siblings may know, each sibling tends to want what the other has. I've seen this principle hold true even within my own household. For instance, if I get to stay up later at night, my sisters will want to stay up later too. But then the next day, when it's time for school, my mother would always pack lunch for my littlest sister and expect my middle sister and I to pack our own lunches. And we would gripe about how unfair it is that our younger sibling gets everything. I'm sure this type of scenario is familiar to a lot of you. We believe that we are all treated differently by our parents, but do parents really treat their children equally? If so, how does it affect the other children? These were the questions I asked myself before deciding to research on this subject to discover how your birth order affects your personality. To begin, keep in mind that each new child born into a family will be treated slightly differently than the last one, even if the parents love all their children equally. This can be explained using the theory of functionalism. Each new individual born into a family will have a different role within the family. The idea of functionalism being present within the family system helped me to develop my hypothesis that birth order does in fact make a difference to how an individual will develop in terms of their character, since I believe that the child will develop based on their various roles within the family. Now, first of all, there have been numerous studies done on this topic, and although there are some similarities, there is also a lot of confusion on whether or not birth order really plays a part in the development and personality of individuals. I conducted my own research to test this theory and answer the question once and for all of whether or not birth order really does affect personality. Before I get into my results, I'll quickly explain a few theories about how or why birth order could potentially make a difference in personality. To begin, Alison Schaefer, a parenting expert, explains in her article, Birth Order and How It Impacts Your Parenting Style, how the role of each new child changes since the child before them has already acquired certain roles within the family. This article also details several characteristics that children could acquire based off where they fall in the family hierarchy. For instance, according to her observations, firstborns are likely to enjoy doing things by the book and to the best of their ability to receive positive recognition for their actions. She explains that this is because since they're firstborn, the parents are likely to be overprotective and also give lots of positive reinforcement when the child does anything correctly, such as smile or even laugh a little. This positive feedback loop becomes a necessity for the child in order for them to feel accomplished. This also causes them to identify with and look up to figures of authority. Schaefer also discusses how firstborns are likely to be more responsible, since when their siblings are born, they're given more responsibility by their parents. This finding was also consistent with my research, which I'll get more into later. The youngest sibling, on the other hand, tends to get babied, but also gets more freedom than the older siblings did at the same age, according to Schaefer. The parents by this point are tired and may be more relaxed about parenting than they were with their older children. The classic example of this is with a pacifier. When the oldest child dropped their pacifier on the floor, the parents probably sterilized it thoroughly before giving it back to the child. However, by the time the last child comes, the parents know 5 seconds on the floor won't harm the baby, and after dropping it, the pacifier will be lightly brushed off, if that, before being shoved back into the baby's mouth. Although since it's the last child, they will also, as I mentioned, get babied a bit more than the older ones did, since the parents want to cherish each stage of the final baby since they know it's the last one they're going to have. As for middle children, Schaefer claims that since they don't get the privileges of the oldest or get babied like the youngest sibling, they turn to outer sources for attention and tend to be more extroverted. Researcher and psychotherapist Alfred Adler also shared his insights on birth order and its correlation on personality. He claimed that although firstborns were privileged, they also tended to feel overburdened by responsibility and expectation put on them by their parents. He also said that lastborns were overindulged by their parents since they got more attention since they were the youngest, and because of this, they lacked social empathy. According to Adler, the leniency the parents had when it came to the youngest sibling caused them to not identify as much with authority and instead rebel against it, meaning that the youngest child was more likely to become rebellious or risk-taking. One final piece of research I'll share with you before going into my own research is the results of Solway's personality theory. Frank Solway was a renowned professor of psychology, and in his book Born to Rebel, he discusses his theory of family dynamics and how personalities develop. He came to the conclusions that firstborns were more likely to identify with and follow figures of authority, whereas younger siblings were more likely to rebel. As you can see, although there may be some differences, all three of these researchers and experts have very similar conclusions that show an individual's character is indeed affected by their birth order. I'll sum up the personality traits that stood out as reoccurring in all of these works of research. To begin, firstborns are rule followers and become more responsible people since they're given more responsibility from a young age. Middleborn children can be more outgoing as a way of receiving more attention that they may not get at home. And lastly, lastborn children can be overindulged by parents and given more leniency, which could cause them to be rebellious or lack social empathy. After I had a solid background and understanding, I conducted my own research to see for myself how birth order could potentially impact personality. I created a survey and asked first, middle, and lastborn siblings, as well as parents and only children, to see how individuals would rate themselves in certain traits. Each category of my survey was on a scale of 1 to 5. The first category I tested was extrovertedness, 1 being very introverted and 5 being very extroverted or outgoing. Firstborns overall rated themselves as 60% outgoing, secondborns rated themselves as 70%, lastborns 64%, and only children 60% outgoing, meaning that overall secondborns were considering themselves to be the most extroverted. This finding lined up with other research that had found the same results, and therefore I believe that this is a true impact of being a middleborn child. The next category was friendliness. I believe that these results were skewed a bit since not many people consider themselves to be really unfriendly. However, according to my results, secondborn children ranked themselves highest again with an average of 88% friendliness. Firstborns rated themselves 72% friendly, and lastborns 80%, and only children 80% as well. Secondborn children ranked themselves highest again with an average of 88% friendliness. Firstborns rated themselves 70% to 72% friendliness, lastborns 80%, and only children 80% as well. Secondborns, considering themselves to be more friendly, once again correlates with their extrovertedness as mentioned before, and proves what the other researchers had said, that middle children are prone to being more outgoing, which could, as I stated before, be because they weren't given enough attention at home and have to seek it elsewhere. My next trait was responsibility versus risk-taker, and once again, as you can see, my results lined up with those of the researchers, and lastborn had the closest score for risk-taker with a 58%, although all the results were very, very close, within 0.1% of each other. I found it interesting that the lastborns overall saw themselves as more risk-taking compared to the others, even if it was only by a little bit. The next part of my survey was 2 long answer questions. The first one asked if the individual believed that they were treated differently based on whether you were first, middle, or last born, and the second question asked if they believed that the order they had been born affected their personality. Firstborn's responses overall stated that they did believe that they were treated differently based on their birth order, and an overwhelmingly large number of them talked about how there were more expectations and responsibilities placed on them by their parents, which once again lines up with my prior research. Middle children, on the other hand, largely believed that the birth order did not affect their personality, but the individuals who believed it did talked about how they felt like they were largely ignored since they were in the middle. However, they also agreed that expectations put on you by your parents, as well as copying your siblings' behavior, was what impacted their personalities the most. This shows that they were socialized differently than firstborns, since firstborns didn't tend to think that copying sibling behavior was a way of developing traits, since they had no experience with that, since they had no one to copy. Now finally, lastborns. Lastborns mostly believed that they were treated differently, since they were the youngest, and affirmed that this had indeed affected their personality. A lot of them agreed that their parents were more lenient with them than they had been with their older siblings, in terms of letting them do more than their siblings had been allowed to at that age. For example, allowing the last-born to stay up much later than their older sibling at that age is a common practice. I can attest to that. They also tended to state that they felt babied or coddled by their parents more than their siblings were. In terms of biggest influences on their personality, almost all of them said that either copying or rebelling against sibling behavior was a major influence, as well as the way their parents treated them individually. This once again shows how younger siblings are being socialized by the older ones, and these results also line up with the results of the other researchers. Younger children are socialized differently than older children since they have older siblings to look up to and follow, which in turn affects their development. Now remember that near the beginning of this presentation I said there was some confusion as to whether birth order really influenced an individual's personality. However, as you can see from my research and the research done by others I mentioned,